Hi, how you doing?
Hello.
So it is great to hopefully see everyone. And please let us know where you're watching from. My name is Suzannah Bozzone, Dr. Suzannah Bozzone. I am here from Chattanooga, Tennessee, along with the amazing Dr. Jeff Pierce.
Hello. Yes, I am Jeff Pierce, and I am in Northern California, an hour north of San Francisco, Santa Rosa.
Amazing, amazing. And we're going to talk all about anxiety. And has anybody been kind of listening to Anxiety? Do you know that song? It's amazing. Well, I really do like that song because it kind of goes into the feelings that you get when you encounter anxiety. And this is such a prevalent sensation for so many, but we don't talk enough about it in my mind. So it's at Southwest Florida. Exciting. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out. And all right. Well, so what we were thinking, and of course, we really want to do this for you guys and answer questions that you have. But I might start with just a few slides just to get us into the anxiety kind of frame of mind, hopefully not too intensely, to understand a little bit of where we can find power amongst this sometimes quite debilitating diagnosis. And so maybe I'll kick that off with some slides, and then we would love comments from you guys, and let us know what kind of questions we can answer. So I'm presenting my slides. Give me just a second. Boom, boom. Okay, so our goal is to find power despite anxiety, should we have it, and really understand how we can get freedom from it. So just putting us all on the same page to understand, even before COVID, we had about 20% of American adults endorsing some mental illness. And as you might or might not be aware, we've seen suicide rates increase 24% in the 15 years preceding 2014. Then they kind of stabilized, and then they've been on the rise again. But when you look at overall mental health or mental struggles, particularly, you see that even before COVID, and then after COVID, we saw a rise in both anxiety and depression, 25% across the world. And so while we still see about an average, it's in the ballpark of 20% of people endorsing anxiety, they are by far the most common mental illness, anxiety disorders, both before COVID and certainly after COVID, which triggered a lot of anxiety in even people that haven't experienced it before. So we recognize that mental health is actually the primary concern, according to major surveys, the Ipsos survey, Global Health Survey, that mental health is the primary concern among most American adults today. And that many, actually 90%, according to this survey, think that the country is in a mental health crisis. And so when we look at that and we say, okay, well, so that's kind of dismal. You know, these talks always start with doom and gloom, and what can we do to find power around that? Let's kind of look at the roots, because you've probably heard health problems are like plants. You've got to get to the roots in order to really prevent them from popping up again. And recognizing that we spend a lot of time here at Love Life talking about chronic diseases, but we can't take our head from our body and truly break us up into these little pieces, separating mental illness from chronic conditions, because so much of it are rooted in the same issues, the same concerns, the same lifestyles. So when you look at the chances of having an anxiety disorder, we see that nearly or up to 50% have some familial aggregation. But I want to point out that this does not mean this is your destiny. This also does not even mean that this is genetic, that, ooh, everybody in my family is anxious, and so therefore I am as well. But this familial aggregation means that, yes, there's a tendency for anxiety, for example, to run in a family, but we also have to recognize that families go through a lot together. They eat together, they move together, they live together, they pray, study, worship, whatever they do. And they often have the same traumas and the same stressors, and many things that affect one family will affect everyone in the family, perhaps slightly differently, but can contribute to some of that where some people might refer to that as genetic, but it's really kind of a familial aggregation. So Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that as I'm just kind of blowing through this beginning intro? Any comments there? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because it just shows how complex and complicated these things are, right? It's not a single gene that makes somebody anxious, and it's not therefore a single. There's no single fix, right? There's so many variables in play. Genetic, what's going on in your family, what you do day to day, what your environment is like, and so it's important to think of as we'll talk about later, a holistic approach to these things. So, and I'm glad we're talking about it because I totally agree. Even just thinking about typical family medicine visits for mental health are one of the leading reasons that people are seeing a doc, and it's just pervasive. Some low-lying, probably the majority of things, the majority of cases where people can still do their daily to-dos and function, and then some to the point to where it's debilitating and you're stuck in your house. And so this is really important to talk about. I'm glad that we're talking about today.
Yeah, for sure. And so, and it kind of, it speaks a lot to loneliness and environmental factors, because we know, just like we've heard, genes are not our destiny, but it's so much of our environment. And that includes not just the habits that we have, but even our sensation of, do we feel a sense of belonging? That's a really big deal. And actually, we'll talk a little bit about that later on, because if we feel loneliness, like we're not part of a tribe, then that's as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, according to the recent Surgeon General's report, right? That it really kind of poses our adrenal glands to say, I am in danger. I am certainly going to be lunch for this lion lurking in the brush. And as a result, that sensation of danger, that's like the second foundational piece of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Then that really poses this sense of danger that propagates so much of what anxiety is rooted in. I am not safe, right? I am not at peace. I've got so much uncertainty. Let's see. Rochelle says, what do you think of children of Holocaust survivors? I know that there was a study finding epigenetic changes in children of Holocaust survivors. Wow. So that's a really big deal. And again, yes, epigenetics. So that environment that creates the environment where our genes find themselves, they can switch on or off disease. And yes, there's much of that that's passed on throughout the generations and through the stressors that our parents have encountered and so on. And it is really important. And this is why I think it's so important at Love Life. We always check ACE scores, which is adverse childhood events. And it asks a lot of questions around trauma and trauma history, because if your adrenal glands are growing up in an environment where you do not feel safe, and that would be a major example of not feeling safe, then of course it's going to be harder to regulate that stress response, to feel at peace, to feel safe, even in a generation where we are much safer, but having that epigenetic impact can play a major role. And so if we don't recognize that in patients, and that some people with a big trauma history certainly might have a harder time feeling safe than others, and that does play a role, or can play a role, in their outcomes with procedures and with various health outcomes. And so recognizing that, I think, is a really important first step. And having compassion and really kind of getting curious around it. It is not your destiny, but it might mean that we need to support you with a lot of the tools that we'll talk about more, and be aware that that could be a contributor if you have a big trauma history, or even your forefathers had a big traumatic history like that. Lindsay says, when I told Dr. Doug Lyle that loneliness is like smoking a pack of cigarettes, he said that's not true, to not believe it, was also discouraged to seek mental therapy. Weird, huh? Well, so I don't know exactly what the conversation entailed, but certainly a sense of belonging we know is a really pivotal piece. It's one of the pillars of the Blue Zones data, and I think that it's something that we do need to emphasize more in our communities, because many people that are trying to live healthy feel isolated in that journey. You know, I can't go to my daughter's party, or I can't do this because I'm trying to eat really clean, whole food, plant-based nutrition. And sometimes that's isolating, when food should be something that brings us together. And if we can unite and really create an environment that makes us feel like a sense of belonging in that, and that we can eat together, we're going to receive more benefit from that. And so again, I don't know exactly what was behind that. Any comments from you, Jeff?
Yeah, that's interesting, because Dr. Doug Lisle is a very smart guy, and I respect his recommendations. So I'm not sure what was entailed, but I think it's a focus currently by our Surgeon General, and I don't think we'd be looking at it on a national level if it wasn't important. And I know Dr. Dean Ornish likes to quote that isolated, lonely, and depressed people have a 3 to 10 time increased risk of death compared to those who, feel loved and in community. And so, a 3 to 10 time increased risk of death during the study sounds like a really good reason to be focusing on it. And so, I think it all ties in with stress and anxiety and loneliness and microbiome changes, and looking forward to learning more from you, Dr. Bozzone.
Well, yeah. And I think the power and the opportunity, again, where there's obstacle, there's opportunity. This is where I really feel that we have so much opportunity if we create communities around healthy living, if we unite around this and say that, okay, it's not just that we can reduce premature death. Yeah, that's great and good at all, but actually we can have fun in the process, and we can unite around it. Then there's just so much power in that. And so one thing that we just want to make sure that you understand is the difference between worry and anxiety, as in a diagnosis of anxiety, because it is very common and in fact normal to have worry. What is worry? This is the fear of the unknown, and we all have had it at some point, no doubt. And so really to recognize that, but when does it become anxiety? And just so that we get a kind of understanding of what is anxiety. Well, there's a lot of different kinds of anxiety. There's specific phobias, and there's OCD, and there's different kind of branches of it. But I use generalized anxiety disorder, which is just one of the kinds of anxiety out there, just so that you could get an understanding of what's a diagnosis. When am I diagnosed as having this versus not? So according to the DSM-5, generalized anxiety disorder is when we're struggling for 6 months or more. So it's pervasive. It's not just, ooh, I have this big event and I'm worried about the outcome, and then it resolves with the event, but rather it's pervasive. It's going 6 months or more, and it's excessive. And I think that that's an important point. It's not just a little worry about the outcome, but it's excessive. It's above, what is deemed normal, if you will. And that's kind of a question mark, but it also causes distress. And it includes multiple domains. So it's not just like, when your kid hates school and they say, I have a stomach ache, I don't want to go to school, but in every other form of their life, they're fine. Well, they don't like school, but that's not affecting in every domain in there when they go to soccer and when they're home and et cetera. So it's in all domains of your life. In other words, social, financial, work, health, et cetera. And it's something that's felt viscerally. So viscera, like in your gut. And this is a gut opportunity as well that we'll talk about as well. How can our gut health affect our mental health and anxiety? So we'll get there in a moment, but it's felt throughout the body. It's not just in your head. But truly, so much more is connected than what we've given credit for, particularly in the realm of mental health and the gut health connection. Again, we'll expand on that in a little bit. The other thing that's just necessary for this diagnosis is that it has at least 3 physical or cognitive symptoms. And so it's not just that I'm worried about this, but I can't concentrate. I've got muscle aches. I can't sleep. I'm irritable. So those are just some. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea that it's affecting your mind and your body, your whole body, and it's causing distress such that you cannot live in a way that you feel like you're functioning at your best. And so that's kind of just to notice the difference there. And I don't know about you, Jeff, but when I've had patients, and I've had quite a few patients, and I do a lot of kind of talks around mental health. And I tell you, anytime you survey people and be like, what do you want to hear about? They're like, anxiety. That's why the song is so big right now, because it's such a big deal. And when you think about what are people doing with their anxiety, how much effort do they put in trying to remove it? Have you seen that before? They're actually causing anxiety because they're trying so hard to get rid of their anxiety. Have you ever come across that before?
I guess so. Yeah, you can focus too much on a problem and it compounds it at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I have seen this so much. And once you start looking for it, then you'll see it everywhere. And so, and it's such a big deal, because then you'll see, oh my gosh, then all the feeds are like, hey, take this supplement to get rid of your anxiety. And hey, do this grounding exercise. And hey, so you're searching out these ways to remove it. But the goal is that we can recognize that we have these thoughts and these worries and these fear of the unknown for a reason. And actually, there's something quite powerful that we can learn from them. And so first, we want to just recognize and name that we're having these emotions. And we'll talk about why we would do that according to the data. But the goal is, first of all, to not want to remove or cut off the head from the body, not to remove the sensation, but to rather recognize that in order to find power despite this overwhelming monster, and it's not to minimize how overwhelming this can be. If you've ever been in a panic attack or have seen someone in a panic attack, it's so all encompassing. I don't know. Have you ever watched The Producers with Gene Wilder? And he's like, I'm hysterical. I'm in hysterics right now. I'm hysterical. And then the guy's like, stop, you're making me nervous. And then he goes, I'm hysterical. And then the guy gets some water and he throws it in his face. And then he's like, now I'm wet. I'm wet and I'm hysterical. And then he slaps him and he goes, now I'm in pain. So it's this excessive moment where you cannot settle down and it feels more than you can bear. And this is the wave of anxiety. And the goal that we want to really instigate with you is to recognize the goal is not to remove those thoughts, but to change your relationship with them, so that because of those thoughts of fear or worry, actually, because of them, you can thrive. But it requires, rather than getting engulfed by them, it requires changing your relationship with them. So the goal and how we can do that, there's a lot of different ways to approach that. And so this is a very strange picture, but I think it's kind of fun. Does anybody know? Put it in the chat. Does anybody know what this is? I know you're like, what is she talking about? This is totally whack. But look and say, what do you think that is? Any guesses? What did you say? You said it was cornflakes before, Jeff, right? Anybody think this is cornflakes? Any thoughts? So it's not cornflakes. I've heard people say leaves, like dried leaves. But so why am I bringing this up? Well, when you name it, it looks a little disturbing right now. You're kind of like, okay, skin cells. Yes, awesome. Well done. Or mushrooms. Nice, Janet. Well done. Okay, so yes, this is an electron microscope of the human skin. So this is skin cells. So why am I bringing this up? Well, if you look at it and you don't know what it is, it's kind of scary. It's kind of disturbing, right? And then when you know what it is, you can start to be curious about it. You can say, oh, so the ones on the right, well, I wonder if those are like the old dead skin cells and they're sloughing off. I mean, I find this thing kind of interesting. You might be kind of gagging audibly. However, that said, you start to get curious. Once you name it, you start to get curious. So why would I bring this up? Well, when you're having an emotion, you've probably heard the saying, name it to tame it. Well, what does that mean? If you name an emotion, according to our studies, it shows, this is psychologist David Rock, that subjects who put their feelings into words and they say, okay, I am feeling scared or I'm feeling worried or whatever that might be. When they put it into words, it actually lessened the intensity of the emotion. But specifically what's happening is when I perceive danger or worry, I perceive it in a place in my brain called the amygdala. This is your fear detector. And so when my amygdala, and people, going back to that comment about the Holocaust, say, for example, or trauma history, well, these people's amygdalas are just hyperactivated. And there's some people, you could say, I'm an anxious person, or you could identify as that. Well, some people just tend to have an amygdala that's more on the hyper response. And so what's really valuable is when you name it, what that does is allows it to move into the prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? Well, the prefrontal cortex is where we access rational thought. So we can start thinking. So that in Gene Wilder in that scene, he couldn't think straight. He's just hysterical. He's hysterical all the time because he's so like in his prefrontal, he's so in his amygdala. But when you name it, but first of all, when you're in that state, you decrease blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. You physically can't snap out of it. So when the other guy was like, stop, like snap out of it, you're hysterical, then he can't access that. And so when people try to tell you calm down, it's like the worst thing that they could do, because you can't start to get into that place of rational thought until you get out of your amygdala, because you're having blood flow decrease to your prefrontal cortex. So by naming it, that's the first step. Name the emotion. That allows you to kind of put the yellow light to slow down, to move it from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex, slow the noise, and then begin to recognize and assess, what can I do to shift out of this panic that I'm in? And so this from Headspace, when we see our fears clearly, they're a little less scary. So going back to this idea that what we don't want to do is just cut off the head and remove the anxiety. We want to approach it with curiosity. And so what does that mean? Well, again, going back to this skin cells, if I start to first name it, it's skin cells, then I get distance from it. Because if I'm weighing down with a stressor or a worry and it's on my head and shoulders, it's only painful. And when I look at it, it's only ugly, right? But when I start to get distance from it, I can start to see it from a different light. And I might just find that it's something, as I get further away from it and see it from a different perspective, that's something very beautiful indeed. And so the idea is that in this process, in this journey, I can start to say, oh, I've just been diagnosed with this thing and I don't know what it means, right? Someone told me my calcium score was high. Am I going to die of a heart attack right now? What's going on? And then you say, well, actually, what could that potentially do if I get distance from it? It could be the first thing that I really needed, that kick in the butt, to recognize, you know what? I need to connect to meaning in my life. I need to spend time with my kids. I need to look at the food I'm eating and ask myself, is it truly nourishing me? Is it improving my blood flow? I need to pause for a moment to get in this space. And perhaps that thing that drove so much worry was just the most beautiful thing I could have imagined to start living the life I always imagined. So getting distance from it is required. And that's where you can get curious. And that's what's necessary to, again, not remove the fear or the worry, but to just get distance and get a little bit of, opportunity in that. Any comments on that, John?
No, I love it. Pain is an opportunity for progress.
Yeah.
And just changing point of view with the right tools. It's not easy, but it's important to realize that that's a real tool to address this.
Yeah. And it is. So, you think we try to get out of struggle so much. We try to be happy all the time, but it is that we've got to lean into the struggle. And that's where we find the finest version of ourselves, that really there's very little worth having that doesn't require a little bit of work, whether it's your training or what is it you're looking for. But a little bit of struggle is really what can start to purify that. And so when I think of what do people often fear, they might fear death. And I mean, I know we're going deep, right? But it's kind of fascinating because I don't know if anybody, and this might truly go the wrong way, but if you have watched the Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, you might recognize this scene where the Grim Reaper comes to the door. And of course, they're having a dinner party with the Americans. Say, oh, we really can't do it right now. And so the guy answers the door and the Grim Reaper's at the door. And he goes, I'm the Grim Reaper. And the guy goes, darling, it's Mr. Death. Well, he's come about the reaping. And I don't think we need any right now. And she said, well, don't just sit there, darling. Ask him in. Do have a drink. right? And so, but that's it. That's where the opportunity is. When you recognize it, you name it. I have a fear of death, let's say, just throwing it out there because this is a great scene. The rest of the movie is somewhat disturbing here and there, just if you do decide to watch it. However, you need to ask it in for tea. That's the idea. It's so this is, of course, don't eat the salmon mousse, because this is, how could we all be dying at once? But that's a side note. But when you ask it in for tea, you're starting to get curious. So then that kind of backs up. So first you name it. So that moves it into the area where you can have rational thought. And then you can start to investigate it and start to get curious with it. And that kind of takes us to this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we kind of alluded to before. So after you have your basic needs met, so once I can get into my rational thought place, I'm out of the amygdala, the fear detector, I'm into rational thought. And then I can start asking myself, actually, am I safe? And if I'm probably being honest, probably for most, maybe not all, my basic needs are met. I got food, water, shelter, maybe, hopefully. And then the second level of that is, do I feel safe or do I feel uncertainty? And so if you're really honest, at this moment, I am safe. And that's where I'll start with patients, especially that have a large history of trauma, is to ask them, where do they feel safe? Because from my context, I have seen people that despite doing all the things, right? They're eating a clean diet, they're exercising, they're doing all the things, and they're checking these check boxes, that they struggle, especially if they have a high ACE score or a high history of trauma, to feel safe. And until they feel safe, I think it's really hard to fully reap a lot of those benefits. And so trying to get that allowance and that ability to feel safe, and then imagining that and asking yourself about it and checking in with it, that's really kind of recognizing, allowing, and then starting to investigate and say, are these thoughts that I'm having valid? You know, so is there a reason why I'm so panicking about this that I can't even see straight or engage in my life? Or am I actually the safest I've probably ever been since mankind? You know, and so starting to like look at that and see where we can go from there. And then taking that to the next level, once you ask yourself, are you safe, and try to re-inform your brain that you are safe. One way to do this, that's my favorite, is a gratitude practice. Do you have a gratitude practice, Jeff?
Sometimes I'll do either a gratitude journal or try to come up with something new at the end of the day to be grateful for, that kind of thing. But I don't do it regularly.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. I love this because it's not overwhelming. It could take 90 seconds. It could take longer if you want it. But if you start your day instead of with uncertainty, like I think a lot of us tend to get on our phone and maybe look at the news, maybe before before bed or first thing we get up in the morning. So if we can just put bookends on the day and start cultivating certainty in our life, and we can start talking through options of how to do that, and then reminding ourselves that we're safe, but starting your day with gratitude is almost taking that safety to the nth degree. And so why would we begin to do this? Well, there's only so much space in the brain. I know I only have so much space in the brain, and currently I'm spending it watching like Monty Python reels. However, in this space in the brain, if you consciously focus on gratitude, this could be as easy as writing down 3 things I'm grateful for. It doesn't have to be deep. It could be like, I love it when you pet your cat and it's like, oh, you know, does that thing, or you crunch on the acorn, or, you know, these moments where you can find awe or joy or gratitude in your day, and you spend time with that physically forces out negative emotions. And so we see the data shows that people with gratitude practices are more happy and content. They also tend to sleep better. So it's a great thing that perhaps you start your day writing down 3 things you're grateful for. Maybe you check in before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And what is that doing? Ooh, it's kind of putting us into that I am safe. And in fact, maybe I can digest better. This parasympathetic nervous system, I can rest and digest better. And then before bed, you say, no, I'm not worried. I'm safe. And in fact, I'm grateful. And then it can help improve the sleep, and it affects your perception of your reality, because that's really what can either drive negative stress outcomes or not, is how we perceive the stress to be. It's 90% my way of looking at that stress. It's only 10% of the stress itself. So recognizing the power that holds, and then we do see reduced anxiety and depression. And in fact, this study showed that 15 minutes of gratitude on 5 days of the week, they did it for 6 weeks, promoted lasting changes in perspective and improved mental health. So this could be something that is where, doesn't take that much time, but really can affect how you perceive your reality, because what you are looking for grows. And if gratitude is what you're looking for, you'll see more of it. You'll see more positivity in your life, and that affects how you interact with your universe. And the power is so real. So any comments on that? You thinking maybe I'll do it more?
Yeah, I think it's a great practice. I didn't know about that study, and you're totally right. You can wake up and think, there really is a chance that a big meteor might be hurtling towards Earth, or that, a car might crash into my house, or that, there are all of these possibilities out there that are really scary. The likelihood of them are a lot lower than today's going to be a beautiful day, and everything's gonna be just fine. And so if you start your day really thinking like, hey, I've got a family that loves me, or I have a beautiful plant that I've been nurturing, and it just, it's got a tomato starting to form, or whatever it is that brings you joy. And because life could be a million things, but it's so much about point of view and what we focus on, right?
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah. It's so big. And in fact, I believe, don't quote me because I feel like it's 9%, but I could be off on that number. But I think gratitude practice actually showed a 9% reduction in all-cause mortality. So that's pretty cool. Anxiety is borrowing from tomorrow's problems. Amen. So like being in this present moment, that human being rather than the human doing, and what the power that can hold. And anxiety is fear of the future. Depression is often regret of the past. So if we can just cultivate more of an opportunity to be in this moment, and maybe even be grateful in this moment, or find awe. I don't know if you've read the book Awe, The Science of Awe by Dr. Keltner. It's kind of amazing, because you go on awe walks, and awe can be awful, but things that make you feel small, while the world and the universe is so amazingly massive and inspiring and huge, but you're a piece of that. What he showed was that what he discusses in that book, or one of the many things, is that when people have high anxiety, they tend to draw themselves as the biggest stick man in the picture, or woman, whatever. And that when they've been in an environment where they are really inspired by awe, so say like the Grand Canyon, or I don't know if you've ever been to Montserrat, and like these places that just blow your mind, and they blow your mind literally, making you have to rethink what you've always known to be true. That's kind of part of the definition. And so after they were, say, in the Grand Canyon, and in this amazing thing where they were so small in this massive universe, then they drew themselves again. And not only did they have smaller anxiety or better mental health scores, but they drew themselves as something small in this massive world, feeling connected to the bigger universe. And that kind of takes us back to that feeling of loneliness versus feeling connected to something bigger. And that something bigger could be meaning, or it could be nature, or it could be self, or it could be others. But really trying to get connected, that takes you back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So now I've got my basic needs met, I feel safe. And then you start looking at connection, and that social connection, and finding gratitude, and finding love, and finding connection in that, and watching how that kind of totally changes our interaction with our universe and how we perceive things to be. So I would love to hear any questions that you guys might have, and any thoughts that might be coming up for you guys. My plant-based cardiologist told me that anxiety is like smoking, that I better get that under control. And then I had anxiety about having anxiety. Yes, a little bit like sleeping problems. Like the harder you try, the worse it becomes. And so yes, maybe the presentation of that comment could have been shifted. But I think a place to start is to recognize where you are, and I think this is really, so mindfulness is a great thing we can talk about, but this is kind of what I'd love to spend the rest of this just discussing, ways that we can lower uncertainty in our life. And in that, you find and feel connected to a bigger picture, because those things will nudge you to feel safer in your universe and to start addressing the anxiety without trying to focus so much on removing the anxiety, which is kind of what that prompted. If I focus so much on removing the anxiety because I'm afraid it's going to cause me to have a heart attack, then I'm having anxiety because of the anxiety. And so again, to be with it, to allow it in, to ask it in for tea, and then start to investigate it and see what you can find. And there's so much power that's available if we start down that journey with compassion and nurturing. One resource that I love is Tara Brach, Brach. She's got she does some podcasts on this. She's amazing. She's got loads of resources, but she has this mnemonic RAIN. So the R is to recognize. So again, recognize, kind of like naming the emotions, recognize it's there, recognize you have anxiety, or you're having some of these worries of the unknown. And then the A is allow. That's asking it in for tea. And then the I is investigate. So getting curious, and getting curious, not in a critical way, but more like in the way the cat kind of like pats at something. Oh, oh, this is kind of, what if I do this, and so you're just getting curious. And then the N is really to nurture or to nourish you. And that's kind of where we can maybe spend the rest of this time to understand, how can I nurture myself so my brain isn't so uncertain? And there's great ways to do this. These are some ideas of what that could look like. Where do you find your mindfulness, your being, that is to cultivate your well-being, or your gratitude? And what does it look like for you? Because it's going to look different. I have a feeling for Jeff, maybe it looks like that garden picture, maybe. And then for me, it would be one of the exercise things probably, but you find the thing for you where you feel at peace or you feel safe, and you cultivate that, and it's so worth the investment.
Hey, Suzannah, show that last slide, the 8-week study for mindfulness.
So this is, again, another way to get curious, to be in this moment. What's mindfulness? You could look at that as meditation. This is mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is kind of an 8-week intensive mindfulness program. And in this JAMA Psychiatry article, 2022, it showed that a mindfulness-based stress reduction program for 8 weeks was as effective as Lexapro, which is escitalopram, one of the most common medications used for anxiety, to reduce moderate to mild anxiety. So again, that allowing, that being with it. And the goal is not to shut off the thoughts, but rather to have the power to choose one thought over the other, and to be compassionate and curious with that conversation, as opposed to critical. And I think a lot of that is the way that we encounter this. Try to imagine that playful kitty when you do these kind of things. And it can look a lot of different ways. For some people, the scariest place in the world is to be in meditation in your quiet, scary brain. And for other people, and so that's why, you might find that your place is more in nature, and you can feel that sense of connectedness, and you can feel at peace, but you don't have to be sitting here trying to, be in your meditation, and that might not be where you're ready yet. So, but this is just, again, to recognize it can look different ways. So whatever lens you go through, there's actually great data to look at awe, or to look at mindfulness, or to exercise, movement, etc. And did you have any comments on that?
Just, there was that question from Instagram about what is mindfulness, and give some examples. And I think, there, as the subtitle on the slide, awareness and acceptance of the present moment. So it's different than meditation in the sense that, classically in meditation, you're clearing your mind of thoughts. And when one comes in, you just kind of let it blow through or roll off you, and just sort of focus on finding that zen, finding that clear sort of thoughtlessness in a sense, but just being one with the world or whatnot. And mindfulness is a focus more on all your senses in a peaceful way. How does it feel as I slowly walk barefoot through the grass? What does the chair feel like as I sit and breathe deeply, and things like that. And John Kabat-Zinn has some great books on mindfulness. I mean, he's one of the forefathers of it, if I understand that correctly. But both mindfulness and meditation are helpful for us. So this 8-week study in mindfulness showed all these wonderful improvements. And then another one that I had in mind, which was a Harvard 8-week meditation study. It showed, it was like an epigenetic study, and it showed after 8 weeks, like 300 genes were changed favorably. And so, these sorts of things, mindfulness, meditation, etc., affect us on a genetic level, and clearly also affect us on a day-to-day, what's our stress level, what's our anxiety level, our pain level, and things like that.
Yeah. And I think it's really cool too, because you expect drift of your thought process, so in that kind of awareness is that the goal is, again, not to succeed at mindfulness or meditation, but rather to expect your mind to wander, and you just recognize the drift and be able to pull it back. And so in that same regard, it's like getting, if you've ever done meditation apps, or, I really like Headspace. And he talks about, it's like taming wild horses. I've never tamed wild horses, so just FYI, but he talks, the goal is just that they're working with you rather than you fighting against you. And I think that's the same with the thoughts. And that so often, if we recognize that many of the thoughts that we have are not our own thoughts. They've been handed down to us, or they've been this negative self-talk that might have come from a parent or a teacher or something along the way. So if you just kind of get distance from them and then allow yourself to be able to, this one I'm going to let pass because it's not really serving me right now, then that's really kind of the process of coaching this ability. And it's like, it's a trained thing. It's not like it's easy. But it's pretty powerful. So that's a great question. So anyway, so the rest of this, I think we can just talk about, like, how else could you imagine we can reduce uncertainty? If you want to talk amongst yourselves, any thoughts about where uncertainty comes from in your lives? I would say one place I see a lot of uncertainty, and sleep is very difficult, particularly in a world where we don't know if it's day or if it's night. And so if we can inform ourselves that it's daytime and we should go outside, go on a walk after your meals maybe, or get outside in natural light first thing in the morning, and try to shut down the blue light at night, and try to really mimic sunrise and sunset as much as we're able in our lives, in our access to nature if we can, or even in, just cutting the lights in half at dinner time, like when the sun sets, and try to be aware of that. Then that's limiting the uncertainty of our brain not knowing if I should be awake or be asleep. And so much of that is contributing to sleeping disruption. And we know that just even one night of insufficient sleep increases anxiety the following day by as much as 30%. So we have less ability to go from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex after one night of insufficient sleep. Yes, fart walks. Yes, Lindsay. So I love talking about fart walks. I don't know if, Jeff, you were aware of that, but so fart walks.
Very aware.
Yes, very aware. Okay, so moving after your meals, if you contract your muscles, you bring sugar into the cells without having to surge insulin to do it. And so it's just the most amazing thing. So a fart walk is life-changing. Get it whenever you can, ideally 20 minutes, but if 5 is all you got, do that. And it is just change your life. Change your life. Fart walks will change your life. The future is always my biggest source of anxiety. Right. So, and that's a really, really common thing. And so whatever we can do to say, but how could we be? Again, that future and the thought of the future, where are we going? Where are we going? What could we do to get into this present moment? And there's different ways to do that. But again, a gratitude practice. In this moment, I am safe. And what am I grateful for? Or recognizing what is it I need to connect more to in the now, because this is the moment we certainly know that we have. And so often we blow right through it trying to think about the next thing that we were going to do. And you think, well, who are the people that I want to connect to? And limiting I have this challenge that's connect more. At first it was connect more in 24, which does rhyme, but now it's connect more in 25 because the year changed. And but that being said, it's just like, it's just putting limitations on your technology, and then having one simple step each day to connect to something that's meaningful in your life. And so it could be write an actual letter to someone, or call someone instead of text them. And so we get so much in this productivity phase of doing that we forget to be, and that we forget that probably the most valuable part of your day is when you connect it to someone or nature, or or those moments. And so if you if you can cultivate that even for 5 minutes a day, I think it's easier to remember how valuable and how necessary it is to be in this moment, which is more and more challenging in our 21st century life. But yeah, it's a big deal. It doesn't make it easy, but just recognizing, what are the other things that we could shift away from uncertainty to being in this moment, allowing this moment and being present in that. Any other thoughts on that? I think one thing that I always like to mention is that if you're having a sugar crash, you really can't tell the difference between a sugar crash and a panic attack. And so, you start sweating, you have palpitations, you have anxiety, you have fear, you have all of those things. And so the power of stabilizing your nutrition and truly nourishing yourself to stabilize those sugars, it's very hard to tell your brain you are safe if you're crashing, because we're eating fiberless meals, or we're eating, or we're doing things that are putting us on a roller coaster ride, whether that's a ton of caffeine or whether that's alcohol, or whether, over the long run, that can really exacerbate the uncertainty predicament that is kind of triggering some of those feelings. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, one step back, when you're talking about the future, I think that's people worrying about the future is a major cause of anxiety in America. And without getting too much into the politics, I think with us being a very polarized nation politically right now, really having two parties, and so each election, it seems like half the country is really unhappy and worried about the future, no matter which direction it goes, right? When you're in a very polarized society like this politically. And so that's a source of worry. And then, things like things that maybe our grandparents weren't worrying about, like our presence on this planet is just, potentially destroying it, or at least destroying our chances of survival on it, and the climate change and all this kind of stuff. And so one thought is to remember that there are many possible futures, and worrying about the scary ones doesn't necessarily reduce their chances of happening. And putting things into action on a day-to-day can be helpful, right? Be the change that you wish to see in the world, of like, hey, I'm eating as close to 100% plant-based as possible, and I know that reduces my, footprint on the planet, and the amount of water, and the amount of pollution, and the amount of petroleum use, and all this kind of stuff. And so there are some things that you can do, just little things day to day, that reaffirm that you are a positive. You do have some small positive role in chances for the future, but as well as just remembering that the future, who knows what tomorrow brings, but we have today, and that's the present, and it really is a present. So that's a good, I think, thing to talk about.
Yeah, and this comment from Instagram, I read once that our brains weren't designed to have access to this much information this often, and amen. So I just posted this thing yesterday. It was about they took people for 2 weeks and they made their smartphones into dumb phones, which means that they couldn't access on internet all the time on their phones. They could access it on their desktop or whatever, but just not on their phones. And the goal, so this is kind of fascinating for a number of reasons, but the original group in the study was like 400 and something, like 450 ballpark. Only 25% of them were actually able to do the task, which was to limit to a dumb phone 5 days of the week. That's how difficult it is. But of those people that did it, which was, say, I don't know, 150 or 100 and something, that 91% of them showed benefit in mental health, in subjective well-being, and in the ability to focus and have attention. And so I think that's so powerful, because when you look at how we read now, like if you read online, I get the things that I get are like, these pop-ups, and it's like, do you want to stick your handstands? And then it's like, why you should stop washing your hair. I don't know what kind of algorithm I'm in, but the thing is then we try to go back and you're getting all of these like bings and dings and whatever. And you're trying to go back and say, what was I reading? I can't focus on anything because I'm getting hit with so much information. So they say that's like jet skiing. You know, you see all this amazing stuff, but with so much information so fast. And in our brain, particularly with linear reading, really understands kind of more like scuba diving, like really blocking off our senses and focusing in on that one shell or that one thing moving, or the, you know, this amazing sense of being in the zone that we've lost and that everyone craves right now. But so much of it is because our attention span, we are just getting bombarded with so much information, more than our brains are really able to hold. So our attention span is lowered from like 2.5 minutes to, I think in 2018, I can't remember the name of the researcher, but it was like 47 seconds. I'm sure it's less than that now, but this, you know, and how they're like, oh, you got to make your reels 30 seconds because no one will watch longer than that. You know, and all of the, it's a sad state of affairs, but yeah, we're not designed to have so much information at one time. And it really does tend to provoke more uncertainty and more struggle with being able to focus and actually maximize our cognitive function. So figuring out where you can put barriers around that is to reduce that uncertainty, but thrive because of it. Because not all technology is bad, but that's where, again, we don't want to remove all the technology. What we want to is just control the inundation and shift our relationship with it so it's not overwhelming us.
Yeah, yeah,
I think
I totally agree. And I think assessing, okay, how many minutes or hours are we spending on social media or other sort of tech things that are pinging all sorts of information to us? And my wife's a teacher, and she asked her high school age kids how much time they're spending on social media and stuff like that. And one child said something like 7 hours a day on average. And you know, how do you have time to, one, how do you have time to do anything else? And then two, like, how is that affecting brain development and whatnot? And so I think a something that most of us can benefit from is coming up with, okay, I'm going to set some boundaries. I'm going to make sure that I put the phone down at a certain time of night, or that I get in, you know, an hour of reading a book that doesn't flash at you. And a big part, of course, also is just getting out into nature, right? Like you and I are both big fans of the research done on forest bathing out of Japan, where you just get out into nature and you take deep breaths and smell and see and touch and listen and feel. And blood pressure goes down, pulse goes down. Our immune cells, the natural killer cells, go up and stay up for weeks at a time. And we were just not built to be sitting in front of a screen for, you know, how many millennia have we been outdoors listening to bird sounds, watching the leaves blow in the leaves blow in the wind. And then what a short amount of time have we then sort of felt like we're in the middle of Las Vegas 24 hours a day with the lights and the sounds and stuff like that. So we're sort of turned on our head on that. And that's a big cause of anxiety.
Yeah, right on. And yeah, Lindsay says the creators of social media like TikTok don't and won't even allow their own kids to use it for a reason. Yeah. So I don't know if you've read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and or Girls on the Brink. I can't remember the name of the author of that one, but it's so devastating. But again, this is where you think, well, we could focus on how devastating it is, or we could start to come together and actually act on it. You know, like, what can we do when we have these senses of overwhelmed because of X, Y, or Z? Well, this is where we have the opportunity to tie into that community and to really move and strive and live and play and do everything we do with a sense of meaning in our life, and to recognize, well, this has happened so quickly. And what can we do to unite as parents of teenagers, for example? I mean, my son is 14 years old, and we finally gave him a phone because he was a social pariah. But it's been really bad. And despite, I got the Bark app, it's like $99 for, you know, and it alerts me like every day because he's listening to rap music, and apparently there's bad words, you know, everywhere. And anyway, so anyway, the goal is that we can unite as parents and recognize that, yes, in fact, and if you look at that book by Jonathan Haidt, he really looks at, especially once, you know, the iPhones turn to where we could do selfies, and particularly girls, which are impacted differently by social media than boys, just the way they're used, you know, the rates of self-harm, of anxiety, of really a lot of the problems we face have just skyrocketed. And so we see that continuous data kind of escalating that seems very much related to the ability to do selfies, particularly in girls, and how that affects our perception of ourselves and our interaction with our universe. But not only that, just the social media, the what other people are doing, that feeling isolated when everyone else seems to be having such a great time and doing great things, and the impact that it has on a developing brain, which is really developing based on use and on environment. And so, and that's a huge conversation for sure, but it certainly is something that would be easier to manage if we really could create community around it and recognize, who do we care for? We care for our kids, we care for our teenagers, we care for ourselves and our mental health. And that if we could create barriers and that we wouldn't be so abnormal if we didn't engage in some of the negative, those things that propagate automatic negative thoughts, the ant infestation, automatic negative thoughts. And what are those things? It's so much of this negativity and uncertainty, which is why you keep on turning on the news, which is why we keep on doing that. So if we just create the environment where we can put barriers around it. Me personally, I just don't watch news at all. That's probably not appropriate for some people. I find it very good for my well-being. However, if you watch it, then have something to complete your stress cycle after. Don't do it right before bed. Don't start your day on that voice, but really, I think a lot of people start the day watching the news or reading the news or whatever they do. So if we could do that and then maybe go on a run, or finish that stress cycle so that you can get it out of your system and it won't affect you so negatively. Recognize what it does do to you and how you feel after it. So naming the emotions, using all those kind of skills to approach it that we did. And it might be that you still engage in the news or whatever, but you do it more on your terms and you have more power around it. And we do the same thing for our teenagers as we try to create foundations or barriers to help us unite around meaning and purpose more effectively. I get off my soapbox.
That's well said. That's good stuff, Suzannah. That's really helpful stuff. I think, I wanted to summarize some of the things, right, that we've talked about that have come up a lot, right? So one, get out and exercise, right? Because we know that exercise decreases depression and anxiety. To
fart walk.
Fart walk. There you go. Pass gas walk if fart walk is too crude for you.
I used to call it a digestive walk.
Yeah, that's right. Airing out. And then number two, get out into nature, even if you're not necessarily going for a fast walk or a hard hike or something like that. Number three, eat a whole food plant-based diet as close to that as possible, because we know that eating more plants gives more fiber to our gut bugs, our microbiome, that actually create hormones, create chemical messengers that help our mood, right?
In fact, serotonin, GABA, dopamine, more than 50% of these things. In fact, serotonin, 80 to 90% produced by the microbiome. So what can you do? The colors of the rainbow and a bed of greens with a side of beans. Don't forget the whole grain. So it's a diversity.
What? Say that again.
Colors of the rainbow and a bed of greens with a side of beans. Don't forget the whole grains. It's diversity of these fiber sources that really supports your healthy microbiome, also helps to reduce inflammation, and that short chain fatty acids that reduce inflammation cross into the brain to help with the brain fog and so much of these symptoms of mental illness that are largely rooted in inflammation also. So the mind and the body are connected. That was a good point.
Colors of the rainbow on a bed of greens with a side of beans.
And don't forget the whole grains.
And don't forget that whole grain. That's beautiful. Right. Huh?
Seeds and nuts aren't in there, but I do.
In parentheses. There's a website that we didn't talk about that might be helpful for folks called Unwinding Anxiety by Judd Brewer.
Yes, Dr. Judd is such a dude. He's amazing.
Yeah. So that's an app, but you can you watch videos. It's been scientifically proven to help with anxiety, so that's a good one to check out. He's also got one for quitting smoking, etc. And then one other study I just wanted to mention briefly was out of nutritionfacts.org. Hopefully everybody knows about that great website, but there was one study. It was a blinded study that compared lavender oil, so oil infused with lavender capsules compared to benzodiazepines like Ativan, lorazepam, these medicines that are used to treat general anxiety disorder that unfortunately have side effects and can be addicting, that the lavender oil did just as good as the benzos in a blinded study. And so if you check out that link, y'all can watch the video on it. What a pleasure to spend this hour with you, Dr. Bozzone. I learned so much. I was taking notes while you were dropping your wisdom. So thank you.
Well, so far, this has been an honor with you, Dr. Jeff, and with all of you guys. Please let us know what you would like to hear more about, and let us know how we can help be a community that helps foster meaningful engagement and gives you evidence-based lifestyle tools to do that and live your best life. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And if this has been useful for you, please share because this video will be available online.
Thank you.